Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you today with an article from the Free Press, or the FP. And this is a long one, so strap in. And I'm guessing this is probably going to go at least 20 minutes right off the bat, just from the length I've seen of this. But the article is The Explosion of Jew Hate in Trudeau's Canada. This article is from December 11th. It says there has been a 670% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in the past year. It was like a dam burst. What happened and why? The Free Press investigates. This is by Terry Glavin. It says, anti-Semitism, Israel, Canada is supposed to be the topics here. So it says, we rarely run pieces this long. Yeah, no shit. It says, but today's investigation, the story of how anti-Semitism became deeply embedded in Justin Trudeau's Canada, called for it. This is a piece worth reading carefully. It is relevant not just to our many Canadian readers, but to anyone invested in the future of the West. So let's get right into it. And again, you can see the cursor is all the way up here. So we got a ways to go. So strap in and come on this unfortunate journey with me. It says the denial is what's painful. So for Sarah Rugheimer, a professor of astronomy at York University in Toronto, the first sign of the virulent strain of anti-Semitism now embedded in Justin Trudeau's Canada appeared on a lamppost. It was a few weeks after the Hamas massacre of last October 7th. Rugheimer, 41, was walking in a park near her home in the city's quiet Cedarvale neighborhood when she saw a poster of the Israeli hostage Elad Katzir, a 47-year-old farmer from kibbutz near Oz, covered with swastikas. In the days that followed, as the war raged in Gaza, swastikas turned up all over Cedarvale. They also started appearing on the York campus, where Rugheimer serves as the Alan I. Carswell Chair for the Public Understanding of Astronomy. As fall turned to winter, a swastika showed up in the snow outside the campus building where she works. So, like, Jesus Christ. It's one of those things, like, I'm picturing it in my head. And just like, who is doing this? So, as an astrophysicist with a particular interest in the origins of life on Earth and the possibility of life on other planets, Rugheimer tended to confine her worldly concerns to scientific matters. So the swastikas came as a shock, but worse was to come. She grew up in Montana, and her academic career took her around the world, from a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics at Harvard University to Scotland, England, and now Canada. But until taking up her post at York University 2 years ago, Rugheimer said she'd never encountered any overt anti-Semitism, nor had she given much thought to her identity as a Zionist. Like the vast majority of Jews around the world, Rugheimer believes in Israel's right to exist. And by the way, people, that's all Zionism is believing in Israel's right to exist. That's it. Okay? Anyone tells you anything different, they're a dumbass. And here is a broken window at the Kehilat Sharei Torah Synagogue in Toronto on May 17th of 2024. It was vandalized again last week. So, you got a lot of tolerant people there in Canada. Gee, I wonder why. I'm sure we're going to find out, because again, this is a long article. We've barely made a dent in it. It says, Jew hatred was a phenomenon of the fringes, she reckoned. It wasn't on my radar, she told me. Now, it's everywhere. Every week there is a major incident in Canada, and multiple minor ones every day in my neighborhood. It was what was happening inside her university that disturbed her the most. York student unions issued a declaration just after the attacks calling the barbarism of October 7th a justified and necessary act of resistance against settler colonialism, genocide, and apartheid. I hate to break it to you guys, but you're actually cheering for the people that did all of those things, and that whose society is full of those things. It's not the Jews. It's not the Israelis. It says the student groups found widespread support among New York's professors, some of whom Rugheimer considered friends. A politics department faculty committee demanded the university enforce a definition of anti-Palestinian racism that encompassed any expression of sympathy for the right of Israelis to exist within their own state. It says, quote, Zionism is a settler colonial project and ethno-religious ideology in service of a system of Western imperialism that upholds global white supremacy. Okay, that is... There are so many things wrong in that sentence, it's not even funny. Okay, this is a group of people that came up with this that have no idea what Zionism is. As we saw earlier up here, all Zionism is believing in Israel's right to exist. That's literally it. Okay, so the people that came up with this are stupid. Okay, keeping on going, says she was shocked by the declarations and the defaced posters and the swastikas. But for Rugheimer, there was something worse. The denial is what's painful, Rugheimer said. The denial of this word right here that I'm not going to repeat for YouTube purposes, and savagery of October 7th, 2023. The denial of the pervasive anti-Semitism and anti-Zionist polemics. The denial of Jewish history itself. Reasonable people can disagree about what to do in an intractable conflict, but the denying of what should be uncontroversial facts makes it impossible to have hope. Says this sort of despair has become a feature of everyday life for Jews across Canada who are experiencing open hatred, and yet are living under a government that appears either blind to it, paralyzed by it, or indifferent to it. I'm guessing probably all three of those, some combination of that. Says law enforcement in Canada is not blind. Quite the opposite. Officers want to do their jobs. What they say is that they lack the moral support from the political class to enforce the law. Not surprising given some of Canada's leadership up there, especially in like the Liberal Party. Says and that they cannot keep up with the volume of hate crimes that arise from a widespread ideology that has normalized the idea that Zionists anywhere are a fair target for attack. It says police for this picture here. It says police at Bayskaya Mushka Elementary School in Toronto on May 25th, 2024, after two people fired shots outside. Yeah, so Jews are definitely under attack in Canada, and the government doesn't seem to care. It says perhaps nothing captured Canada's dark new reality better than a split-screen story from late last month. On November 22nd in Montreal, at the 70th annual session of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, rioters organized by the organizations Divest for Palestine and the Convergence of Anti-Capitalist Struggles, so socialist groups, wreaked havoc on the city. They ignited smoke bombs, threw metal barriers into the street, and smashed windows of businesses and the convention center where the NATO delegates were meeting. The rioters torched cars. They also burned an effigy of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. While Montreal burned, Trudeau was dancing and handing out friendship bracelets at a Taylor Swift concert in Toronto. It took 24 hours for him to weigh in with a single tweet. Not even going to glorify that. I don't even want to look at it. Let's see here. Scrolling over. Yeah, I don't care. He's just a dumbass. Canada, what did you do to yourselves? So next section here says, it was like a dam burst. Says the impression that with the violence unfolding around them is somehow invisible to the state responsible for their protection has overwhelmed not only relative newcomers to Canada like Rugheimer, but also Jews who have lived in Canada for decades. People like Robert Krell, 84, the former director of postgraduate education in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia. Well, good job to him on still teaching at age 84. So as a pioneer of Holocaust education in Canada and a specialist in survivor trauma, Krell immigrated to Canada at the age of 11 after having been hidden by a Catholic family during the Nazi occupation of Holland. Krell was not as shocked by the unspeakable barbarism of the Hamas massacre of October 7th last year as by the jubilation the atrocities elicited from within the progressive milieu across Canada and by the total silence from the social justice scene. What does this caption say? It says, please respond to a dispute between an Israeli supporter and a pro-Palestinian supporters in Toronto on June 9, 2024. So I'm reading, I don't normally read captions under photos, but it's just to kind of help illustrate the point of what's going on. Like you can actually see it. So on Sunday, October 8th, activists affiliated with the terrorist-designated Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine were already shouting their happiness into megaphones to a crowd at the steps of the Vancouver Art Gallery, only a few minutes' drive from Krell's home. We are calling on those in so-called Vancouver, what do you mean so-called Vancouver, to uplift and honor the resistance, they said, and you're not resisting anything, okay? Like, I know they're using the words, like there's a specific way that they're using the words to try to be, you know, like try to mean, it doesn't, that you're not resisting anything, okay? You can't resist a group of people that aren't actually there, but anyway. So show solidarity and celebrate the steps towards liberation. Okay, you guys need to free yourselves from Hamas. Not from Israel. Israel's not there. They're not doing anything. Okay? Well, now they are because you started it. But anyway. So scenes like these repeated themselves in cities across Canada, all the way to St. John's, Newfoundland. It says, on October 7th, I was horrified, Krell told me. I was shocked to the core by the cruelty, there's that word again, the mutilations, the killing of children, the gouging of eyes. But I could believe it because he's seen it. Unfortunately. It says, what he found impossible to fathom was what he saw on October 8th and in all the days that followed. It was like a dam burst. I can't describe the emotional blow. I guess I thought there would be a cry of outrage about what happened, you know, from the human rights people, Black Lives Matter people, the Me Too people. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I just couldn't grasp the concept that when people heard and saw what had been done to those Jews, there was nothing except celebrations of Hamas as liberators. Americans are familiar with the pattern that has been repeated at dozens of Canadian university and college campuses, the pro-Palestinian occupations, encampments, manifestos, disturbances, and explicit celebrations of the October 7th resistance. In Canada, however, the sociopathology that shocked Rugheimer and Krell is by no means confined to the extremes of campus politics or the rantings of far-left activist groups. Rather than discovering how torn the fabric of their society has become, Canadian Jews are being forced to come to terms with just how deeply anti-Semitism has been woven into it. This is not a matter of anecdote or impression. Another caption here says, police arrive at Talmud Torah Elementary School after the building was hit by gunfire overnight in Montreal on November 9th, 2023. So it says last month, a report by Israel's Ministry for Diaspora Affairs and Combating Anti-Semitism found a 670% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in Canada since October 7th, 2023, including violent attacks such as shootings targeting Jewish institutions and arson attacks targeting schools, synagogues, and other community institutions. There are about 40 million Canadians and roughly 350,000 of them are Jewish, representing less than 1% of the country's population. It says most Canadian Jews feel unsafe and victimized. The University of Toronto sociologist Robert Brim included in an in-depth attitudinal survey of Canadians undertaken in collaboration with Ecos Research published earlier this year. They perceive a rise in negative attitudes towards Jews in the recent months and years. Most doubt the situation will improve. Yeah, I'd go with that. They probably won't. It says, going by the routine occurrences of anti-Semitic violence and intimidation, it's easy to see why. Since last October 7th, there have been several drive-by shootings at Jewish schools in Montreal and Toronto, as the captions of those photos showed. There's a coordinated bomb threat targeted more than 100 Jewish institutions from Halifax to Victoria. Synagogues in British Columbia and Quebec have been firebombed. One synagogue in Toronto, Kehilat Sharei Torah, as there was a picture above of that, has been vandalized 7 times since April, its doors and windows smashed, rocks thrown through the windows. The most recent attack happened just last week. It says Jewish businesses across the country are routinely vandalized. Jews are besieged by pro-Palestine protesters in their own neighborhoods. Jewish parents worry about sending their children to kindergarten. Jewish university students from one end of the country to the other report being afraid to attend class. Based on just how far we are into this article now, which is like a quarter to a third of the way through, I can understand why. And I didn't know, I saw some, stuff coming out of there, but I didn't really, put 2 and 2 together, really think about it that much other than to be like, yeah, something's bad, but kind of compiling it all in this one article, I'm like, yeah, this is really, really bad. It says Montreal's McGill University was perhaps the most dramatically disrupted among Canada's university over the past year. A focal point for explicitly pro-Hamas demonstrations and teach-ins, the encampment at McGill lasted well after the end of this year's spring semester, right through to a summer camp to teach anti-colonial struggle and to transform McGill's space into one of revolutionary education. So they'd basically gone full Marxist. It says posters for the camp featured keffiyeh-shrouded Palestinians with machine guns reading books. And this picture says pro-Palestinian protesters outside Beth Avraham Yosef synagogue hosting an Israeli real estate event in Toronto. I heard about this on March 7th of 2024. So they're just protesting Jews everywhere, apparently. Okay, so yeah, keep going. So long before October 7th, a Canadian variant of anti-Semitism had already burrowed deep into the country's political structure. The world's first Israeli apartheid week, if only they were actually an apartheid society, so the whole concept of this is false, was organized in Toronto 20 years ago, an annual event that eventually spread to more than 60 cities around the globe. So by the time a collective of Palestinian organizations launched the global boycott, divestment, sanction strategy in 2005, with the goal of eliminating Israel as a Jewish state, a BDS movement had already been flourishing in Toronto for 3 years. Israel's Riot Institute was already calling Toronto an important global hub of efforts to delegitimize Israel 15 years ago. Okay, I didn't know that, so it goes back a while. More recently, Toronto's reputation has been overtaken by Montreal, which is fast becoming known as North America's most dangerous city for Jews. At the City of Concordia University, the marketing professor and behavioral scientist Gad Saad said the city's institutions of higher learning had become cesspools of anti-Semitism. Yeah, I follow him on X, and he said that a lot. The Saad said his place in the university community had become so precarious that he took an unpaid leave to join Northwood University in Michigan. Because perhaps to those outside of Canada, this sounds like an overreaction. I don't think it does. It says, but consider what happened on November 24th to Rabbi Adam Shire and his daughters when they headed to downtown Montreal to go shopping. While inside a cafe, they heard sounds of an anti-Israel protest. Shire was wearing his kippah, grabbed his phone to document the event. But within moments, a police officer singled him out and asked him to move. His mere presence as a visible Jew was perceived as provocative. Yeah, you're police officer guy, like, you're the bad guy here. Says this is unconscionable. We're getting the message from society that either we will not or we cannot protect you from the mob that now rules our streets, Shire said. When I came to Montreal 20 years ago, it was a very different place than it is today. We used to tell visitors that you could wear your kippah and walk from one end of Sherbrooke to the other across the entire city and never for a moment have an instant of fear. And that is most certainly no longer the case, and this must be him. It says, we're getting the message from society that, it just basically repeats that. Okay, so this is the dude. And a menorah behind him. It says, almost none of these verbal or physical assaults are coming from white supremacists or anti-Semites of the right-wing variety. Yeah, funny you don't ever see that, even though, at least in the United States, they say, like, white supremacy is the biggest threat. It's like, where are these folks? Seriously, where are they? It says they are being carried out by self-described progressives, Arabs, and often recent immigrants who are operating inside an ideological framework of settler colonialism, which casts Canada, the United States, Australia, and most of all Israel, basically like anything like Britain had something to do with, as irredeemably illegitimate constructs of imperialism, capitalism, genocide, and racism. It's an ideology that has found a comfortable home in Trudeau's Canada. Yeah, so we are what now? We're about like 40% of the way through this, still a while to go. So it says the world's first post-national state. So since 2015, when Trudeau's Liberals were swept into office on a wave of progressive exuberance, the anti-Zionist strain of anti-Semitism has become a well-established radical chic feature of the Canadian political scene. It was reinforced by intersectional alliances that rely on anti-Zionism as both an alibi for anti-Semitism and a marker of progressive bona fides. The son of the 1960s-era jet-setter Playboy Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau told the New York Times Magazine during his first week as Prime Minister that he intended to redefine what it means to be Canadian. The country, he said, he imagined was a country with no core identity, no mainstream, a country that should be understood as the first post-national state. So I'm going to get rid of everything good in Canada. It says, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump, while campaigning in 2015, presented the world with a different view. He famously floated the idea of a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what is going on. Trump's Executive Order 13769, titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States, the so-called Muslim ban, came into effect on January 27th of 2017. The following day, Trudeau tweeted, "To those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you, regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength," which is that Ken line. As Muslims and their supporters gather for a midday prayer before the March for Gaza rally on April 21st, 2024 in Edmonton, Alberta. Oh, wonderful. So from the outset, Trudeau's immigration policy set out to welcome unprecedented numbers of immigrants, temporary workers, and foreign students. Meanwhile, Muslim advocacy organizations quickly rose to unprecedented influence in Trudeau's Canada. The Muslim Association of Canada, for example, has taken in millions of dollars from the federal government in anti-hate funding and other subsidies in recent years. Yet this group explicitly derives its guidance from the wellspring of Islamism, the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, the parent organization of Hamas. The Muslim Association of Canada routinely invites foreign speakers who deliver anti-Semitic, misogynistic, and homophobic sermons. But progressives, as long as it's like oppressed people or people that are perceived as oppressed, they're going to go ahead and support them, even if these groups openly don't align with things that progressives normally stand for, because progressives are dumb. I've said this a million times, and it's kind of proving me right here. It says there are now an estimated 1.8 million Muslims in Canada, twice as many as 20 years ago. Brim's study found that more than 40% of the Muslims surveyed said that suicide bombing targeted Israeli citizens is justified. So they're bad people, too. More than a third said Jews are not entitled to a state of their own. They are, but Jews aren't, okay? The majority, 54%, described Israel as an apartheid state, so they don't even know anything about Israel. Says a full 60% said Zionism is racism, which it clearly is not. We've already gone over that. So they don't seem to know what they're talking about. As Casey Babb, a national security expert, said Canada's Muslims should not be simply tarred with the brush of Judeophobia. Well, that's a new word. But the phenomenon of fashionably anti-Zionist anti-Semitism has merged seamlessly with constituencies of newcomers from cultures where anti-Semitism is deeply rooted, Babb said, referencing Middle Eastern countries that once had ancient and thriving Jewish communities, now completely purged by pogrom and massacre. Yeah, that's basically everywhere in the Middle East except for Israel. Okay? Like, you'd be lucky to find Jews in any of those other countries, and if there are any, it's like single digits, and that's not an exaggeration. It would be insanely naive to think people would come here and abandon long-held, pre-existing, religiously motivated, and culturally ingrained beliefs about Jews just because they're now in Canada. Bab told me, "Yeah, that's one of those things where I'm like, what you think? Like, you see migrants fighting even like Italy that are like from different Somali tribes or something. And it's like, yeah, do you think that just because you moved two groups of people to a different country that there's something like, oh no, we're cool now? Like, no, they're just going to import their conflicts here. That's it." So it says they haven't. It says, and those toxic ideas about Jews have merged with the critical theory leftism to bring the country to a frightening juncture. Canada has now entered what Bab called a dark and terrible period of systemic, normalized, and institutionalized Jew hatred. The statistical evidence suggests that Bab is correct. It says Israel supporters put up posters of Israeli hostages held by Hamas during a Walk for Israel rally on October 2nd, 2023 in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Another sigh. So we're just about halfway through. It says, in Canada, a crime motivated by racial, ethnic, or religious hatred is confirmed as a hate crime only at sentencing after conviction based on evidence at trial. Statistics in Canada reports that Canada's Jews are targets in 70% of religiously motivated hate incidents reported last year. That's 4 times as many incidents as those in which Muslims were targeted, which now number 1 in 20 Canadians. Even so, it's a rare thing for a liberal politician to utter the word anti-Semitism in any statement without saying Islamophobia alongside it. Right, yeah, because they can't just say one without the other. And it's like, for all this Islamophobia, where is it? Again, it's like white supremacists. Like, where is the Islamophobia? Okay? It's hard to know who exactly is even in Canada these days. So there's a growing public uproar over what even the Trudeau government calls an out-of-control system has caused Ottawa to slightly reduce the targets for the flow of migrants. Even so, nearly 5 million temporary residents are expected to see their visas expire in the coming 12 months, and it is not at all clear how many can be expected to leave. There's Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. I don't know why I can't suddenly talk in these last couple of sentences here. That merely guesses at the number of undocumented workers who have already overstayed their visas, suggesting, excuse me, the number could be as high as 500,000. One number Ottawa is fairly certain about is 28,000. That's how many failed refugee claimants are facing warrants to be deported, the whereabouts unknown. Roughly 250,000 refugee status claimants are already in Canada, and it now takes 44 months for a refugee claim to be dealt with after being referred to the board. So that's a while. Is that 4 years just about? Jesus. A related data point. Last year, a federal audit found that 7,000 people who applied for admission to Canada were red flagged by the Canada Border Services Agency and other security agencies for serious offenses, including espionage, war crimes, and terrorism. Immigration authorities let roughly half these people in anyway. I love that. Like, oh, let's look you up. Oh, you're a bad person. You know what? Nah, we're just still going to let you in here. Have a good time. It says there were more than 1 million foreign students in Canada in 2023. After a series of scandals, public uproars, and by-election losses this year in safe Liberal electoral districts, the Trudeau government has promised to cap the number of new student visas at 437,000 for 2025, but it's a bit late. Yeah, I'd say so. It says the police can't keep up. As over the past year, as violent anti-Israel protests and attacks on Jews have become a regular feature of Canadian life, police have said they cannot keep up. In August this year, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police said the disturbances have placed an unsustainable strain on police services across the country, and matters are made worse by the absence of moral and financial support from all levels of government. Association President Thomas Carrick, is that how you pronounce it? Anyway, said police departments are struggling to cope with the increase in the frequency, duration, complexity, risks, and threats of these public assemblies in cities across our country. Between last October 7th and July 7th of this year, or why did I say July 7th? There's no 7 there. It says, so between last October 7th and July of this year, Toronto police attended 1,556 calls that resulted in 130 arrests involving 314 charges related to what the police say were hate crimes. Roughly half the hate crime calls to Toronto police were related to anti-Semitism. The charges involved mostly unprovoked assault, uttering threats, and mischief to property. And here's the cops back here. It says Toronto police stand guard as pro-Palestinian demonstrators attend a rally in Toronto on June 22nd, 2024. I'm going to take a drink here for a second and stop that. Let everybody take a breather because this is kind of a pretty heavy article. There's my drink. Take a swig. All right. There we go. Anyway, back to what we were saying. So it's going by the Toronto Police Service's classification system of all the hate crimes since October 7th that involve religion, 80% involved in anti-Jewish occurrence. There are only about 120,000 Jews among the roughly 3 million people who live in Toronto. In Montreal, in just the 3 months following October 7th, police reported 132 hate incidents targeting the city's Jewish community, 10 times as many reported hate crimes as the entire year of 2022. There are only about 90,000 Jews among Montreal's 1.8 million people, and I'm a feeling that's probably going to end up going down now, given what's all the stuff going on in Montreal. So far this year, Ottawa police report 225 hate incidents, about a third of them directed at the city's Jewish community, which numbers about 14,000 people, less than 2% of Ottawa's population. Half as many hate incidents were reported among Ottawa's vastly larger Muslim community, which accounts for nearly 10% of the city's residents. So what is that about Islamophobia? In the 11 weeks following the October 7th massacres in Israel, Vancouver police reported 33 anti-Semitic hate incidents and laid charges in 17 criminal cases involving anti-Israel protests, including assaults on police officers and obstructing justice. Before the year was over, there were 80 such protests in Vancouver, resulting in 1,800 police overtime shifts and $2.5 million in costs. And this is the Shara Tzedek synagogue, where an explosive detonated in the entryway in Vancouver on May 31st, 2024. I don't, unless there's a picture from that, I don't know if that's just a shadow or the trees in there, but okay. Says the pattern is the same everywhere in this country. In Windsor, Calgary, Edmonton, Victoria, and on and on. A growing number of protests have ended in violence or with threats of violence, Carrick said, and it hadn't helped that Trudeau's government was determined to swell Canada's population as a means to boost the country's gross domestic product. Carrick said the effort had drawn newcomers from cultures where violence is an acceptable vehicle for social change, and that's not good. Back in April, former Royal Canadian Mounted Police counterterrorism investigator John Metcher told me that Ottawa needs to start paying attention to the implications of routine mass protests where acts of terrorism are glorified as righteous and legitimate acts of resistance. Back in 2006, Metcher was on the RCMP team that broke up a terrorist cell inspired by 9/11 known as the Toronto 18, which had plotted to commit beheadings, the bombing of the Toronto Stock Exchange, and an armed assault on the House of Commons and other targets. The investigation resulted in 11 convictions. I didn't even hear about this. That is nuts. Metcher said the current phenomena of pro-Palestinian activism presents a far greater risk of recruitment to terrorism than was presented by the radical activist milieu following 9/11. Back then, you simply did not see people running through the streets saying, "I'm an Al-Qaeda supporter, I love bin Laden." Right, yeah, those people would have been they probably would have had their asses handed to them. But since last October 7th, tens of thousands of protesters have been rallying in the streets at events where unambiguous praise for terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah is routinely offered up in speeches by rally organizers, all in the guise of pro-Palestinian solidarity. It's very different now, Metcher said. With the Toronto 18, we had a small group of people, some of whom had known each other for a while, and they built their little group, and they did it in secret. They didn't have these massive demonstrations where like-minded people can easily identify one another, and there have already been some very close calls. I wonder how much stuff I'm about to read that I didn't know about. And it says Israel supporters during Canada's rally for the Jewish people in Ottawa on December 4th, 2023. Scrolling down. So let's see all the stuff that hasn't been reported here, or at least that I haven't heard of. I should say haven't been reported. It says last December, 2 Ottawa youths were arrested on terrorism charges involving a bomb plot intended to target the local Jewish community. One of the boys' fathers said the family had been concerned that the boys being radicalized online. I do remember hearing something about that. So on July 22nd this year, a Canadian from Airdrie, Alberta, arrived at a checkpoint outside Netiv Ha'asara, a village in southern Israel, and lunged at a security detail with a knife, shouting, "Free Palestine." Yeah, I remember hearing about this. Zachariah Adam Qureshi, 21, is believed to have been radicalized by the anti-Israel hysteria in Canada, and he was shot and killed. Yeah, I do remember that one. All right. So as Richmond Hill, Ontario, arrested 62-year-old Ahmed Fouad, I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing it right, Mustafa El-Didi, and his 26-year-old son Mustafa on 6 terrorism offenses related to an ISIS-inspired plot to carry out a mass casualty attack. The El-Didis had passed several Canadian Border Security Agency and Immigration and Citizenship screenings to enter Canada, even though the senior El-Didi allegedly appears in an ISIS video from 2015 dismembering a captive with a sword. The case remains before the courts. Wow, okay, so that could be people in the United States as well. It was just like that dude, okay, like ISIS supporters. It was on September 4th, as part of a complex cross-border investigation, a 20-year-old foreign student from Pakistan was arrested in Ormstown, Quebec, as he was making his way to the U.S. border. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Mohammed Shahzeb Khan, also known as Shahzeb Jadoun, was headed to New York to carry out a mass slaughter of Jews on behalf of ISIS to coincide with the October 7th massacres in Israel. Yeah, I haven't heard about that one either. Yeah, and I hadn't heard about this other one up here as well, the dude and his son. Because while he was planning his attack, Khan was also applying for refugee status. In intercepted communications, Khan said the plan was to stage the largest attack on U.S. soil since 9/11. The attack was to be carried out with AR-15 type assault rifles and some good hunting knives so we can slit their throats. So good guy there. Yeah, really good guy. So this is pro-Palestine supporters at a hands-off Rafah rally in Edmonton, Alberta on March 10, 2024. Gross people. There's liberal politicians and terror supporters. So we're about 2/3 of the way through this bad boy. We're getting there. So despite the palpable fear that one of these plots will not be foiled, and it sucks to say, but I'm sure that's going to happen. It is only when some embarrassment finds its way into the press that the Trudeau government takes note. I've noticed that about the dude. So, this is 4 years ago, to choose one example, Nissam Siddiqui, a senior advisor in the Privy Council office, was found to be using his Facebook page to circulate claims that Jews were Nazi collaborators and that Israel was a pedophile harboring racist apartheid state. So this guy's just taking every leftist term and putting it in there and saying, they're that. So it says the Privy Council, a parliamentary institution designed to provide discreet top-tier advice to the Prime Minister and his cabinet, claimed it was taking steps to deal with Siddiqui. Let me guess, they didn't actually do anything. It says, but he was still there in the aftermath of last October 7th atrocities, accusing Canada of helping Israel commit war crimes to maintain its brutal racist apartheid occupation of Gaza. So this is a dude that doesn't actually know anything about what's going on there, or anything about Israel at all, which isn't surprising. Okay? Or he's trying to propagandize. He's either stupid or he's a propagandist. This 2 years ago, Diversity and Inclusion Minister Ahmed Hassan personally endorsed a $133,000 anti-racist action grant to a man named Laith Marouf for a series of countrywide workshops. At those workshops, Marouf would teach federally regulated broadcasters about diversity and inclusion, so like an absolute waste of time. It's an interesting choice considering that Marouf is a Beirut-based supporter of Bashar Assad, who was just overthrown, says the ex-Syrian leader who butchered hundreds of thousands of his own people. Marouf is also a regular contributor to the Kremlin's disinformation platform Sputnik and Tehran's English-language propaganda platform Press TV. I do remember hearing something about this. So after the Canadian press got wind of it, several of Trudeau's ministers said they were unaware of Marouf's background, even though his anti-Semitic outbursts have been notorious for 20 years. It's the same thing as under Justin Trudeau, is just everyone's stupid. Since 2015, Marouf has pulled in close to $600,000 from the federal government, and there is the retard himself. It says in 2017, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeted to those fleeing persons, okay, we already did that. Okay, whatever. We're not going to go over that again. We're already running very long as it is. It was around the same time, Salma Zahid, the Liberal chair of the all-party Canada-Palestine Parliamentary Friendship Group, okay, organized a reception on Parliament Hill to mark the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. I don't know what the hell that's supposed to be, but okay. As among the guests was Nazi Katatba, whose newspaper, Al-Meshwar, was already infamous for referring to the Holocaust as the Holocaust and publishing claims that Jewish bankers financed the Nazi Party. Yeah, I love how people say that the Holocaust was a hoax. It's like, yes, 6 million Jews just suddenly were not around anymore. They were just Thanos snapped out of existence. They just, one day they were there and then they just weren't. But no, it didn't actually happen. You absolute effing morons. Another was the security of the Fatah movement, or secretary. I don't know, again, reading stupidity from me here. Another was the secretary of the Fatah movement in Canada, which I did not know existed there. This Nabil Nassar, best known for celebrating the 1972 massacre of Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics and praising the Fatah terrorist Dalal al-Mukrabi, who participated in the murder of 38 Israeli citizens in the 1978 Coastal Road massacre north of Tel Aviv, and I do know about that. Says the meeting was also notable for Green Party leader Elizabeth May's declaration to Mona Abuamara, the chief representative of the Palestinian General Delegation, I take my marching orders from the permanent representative of Palestine to Canada. When reporters asked Zahid about the attendance at an official function of people who explicitly supported terror, Zahid said she couldn't be expected to vet all those who were invited. Okay, so she knew and she's just making excuses. In August, it was only at the last minute that the Liberal cabinet backed away from the appointment of Birju Datani to Canada's top human rights post, Chief Commissioner of the Federal Human Rights Commission. The reversal only came after the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs said Tatani had compared Israel to Nazi Germany and likened Palestinians to prisoners of the Warsaw Ghetto. Again, you know who's keeping Palestinians down? It's the Palestinians. It is not Israel. This last month, the leader of a group of anti-Israel protesters who defied police and tried to take over an intersection near Ottawa City Hall turned out to be Sarah Wazi Mukahal, a policy officer with Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. And so it's more people protesting at McGill University. Okay. It says, then there has been Trudeau's response to Israel since October 7th. So we're about 75% of the way through here. And let's see what retard himself had to say. It says, during a visit to Washington, D.C. in November 2023, Trudeau was asked whether or not he supported a ceasefire. It says, we need to see a cease. We need to see a humanitarian pause so we can flow. We need ceasing of the levels of violence that we're seeing, Trudeau said. By the next month, the country was in favor of a UN resolution calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, and that was just the beginning. It says, in March, Liberals placed a halt on all arms exports to Israel. It was mostly symbolic. Canadian military exports to Israel amounted to less than $30 million in 2022, but even that wasn't enough. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly later announced that Ottawa would also block a U.S. shipment of ammunition from General Dynamics to the Israel Defense Forces. It says the ammunition is manufactured by a division of General Dynamics in Quebec. That's why they were able to do that. I was wondering when I was reading that. It says to former New Democratic Party leader Thomas Mulcair, Joly's argument that Israel has a right to defend itself but should be denied the arms necessary to its defense is utterly incomprehensible, you're right, and indecipherable. Yes, it's stupid. It seems like a lot of the leadership in Canada has a stupidity issue. But Mulcair said Joly made sense of it when he spoke with her this way. Thomas, have you seen the demographics of my writing? So the demographics of Joly's Ahuntsic Cartierville writing, okay, sorry about that if I'm butchering those words, are shifting quite a bit owing to Trudeau's open borders policy. But by 2021, Statistics Canada had already noted that of writing's 118,000 residents, 44,195 were immigrants. People who identify as visible minorities numbered 48,120 people, 21,620 were Muslims, among whom 16,305 were Arabs. Statistics Canada counted only 225 Jews in the riding in 2021. Said Mulcair, I was astonished to hear such a candid admission that very local politics were playing such a role in shaping Canada's foreign policy on this highly complex and sensitive issue. Not all Canadians are happy with the state of affairs. In an Ipsos public opinion poll conducted over the summer, 70% of respondents said that they agree with the proposition that Canada is broken, and it certainly seems like that. It's an idea that has been deftly adopted by Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, and I've heard his name pronounced. I just cannot remember how to do it, so I apologize. So, Canadian leader, I'm just going to Americanize it here. Pierre Poilievre or something. Okay. So the related poll released around the same time showed that 68% of Canadians want Trudeau gone. And yes, this man that's Pierre, and he will be the next Prime Minister of Canada when they do their next elections. And go listen to some of his interviews. The dude's like a totally based, and he's a chat. He's cool. In two recent elections in historically safe ridings for the party, the Liberal candidates were trounced. This never happens in Canada. The Conservatives are running strongest among trade union members, the NDP's traditional base, and in the 18 to 25 age bracket, which is the demographic that pushed Trudeau over the top 9 years ago. So they've all turned on the Liberals. So I'm going to say Pierre. I'm not going to keep saying his last name that I can't pronounce correctly, and I know I'm butchering it. So Pierre's Conservatives are now pulling ahead of the Liberals by a 2-to-1 ratio, signaling a Liberal wipeout in next year's election, and that can't come soon enough, and I hope that happens. It says anti-Palestinian racism. Well, if there... Okay, I'm not even going to comment. Let's read this. It says, in liberal circles, a new ideological construction is gaining ground, one that threatens to destroy all that it touches in much the way critical race theory is done. That new idea is anti-Palestinian racism, defined in such a way as to place Zionism, that is, the view held by the vast majority of Jews, it's like 95%, so beyond the pale of polite society and potentially beyond the bounds of Canadian hate speech law. According to the Arab Canadian Lawyers Association, anti-Palestinian racism is defined as follows. Sorry, throat's getting a little scratchy from talking this much. It says anti-Palestinian racism is a form of anti-Arab racism that silences, excludes, erases, stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives. Anti-Palestinian racism takes various forms, including denying the Nakba and justifying violence against Palestinians, failing to acknowledge Palestinians as an indigenous people with a collective identity, you only started existing 60 years ago. I mean, sorry, I had to stop the quote there, but it's like, you guys are barely on the world map. You're just Arabs. That's all you are. Okay, and I've done a video on this before. There is no distinct Palestinian identity. Okay, like if you were to take their DNA, they would come back as Arab. There's nothing more to it than that. Okay, so it says belonging and rights in relation to occupied and historic Palestine. It's not okay. So this definition is just putting in a bunch of bullshit. Okay. So it says erasing the human rights and equal dignity and worth of Palestinians, excluding or pressuring others to exclude Palestinian perspectives, Palestinians and their allies, defaming Palestinians and their allies with slander such as being inherently anti-Semitic. Well, do you know anything about their society? They kind of are. A terrorist threat, sympathizer, or opposed to democratic values. So this is a very leftist definition here. So, yeah. And again, Palestinians aren't really a thing. I mean, they call them, they're not a distinct group of people. Okay. Anyway, it says worth reading that twice. I could barely read it once. It says there's a definition of racism that makes the most fundamental defense of Israel's existence racist. Right. Yes, that's exactly what it does. It renders it impossible to describe anti-Semitism without running the risk of being described as racist, which is obviously stupid. It says Michael Kotler-Wunsch, I've heard interviews with her before, Israel's special envoy for combating anti-Semitism, has some special insight into Canada. The Jerusalem-born 53-year-old former member of the Knesset spent about half her life in Canada. She went to school in Montreal, completed a law degree at Hebrew University, then came back to Canada for a master's degree. A decade later, she returned to Israel. Anti-Palestinian racism is a legalistic rendering of a vulgar slogan routinely chanted at anti-Israel marches across Canada over the past 10 months. All the Zionists are racist. Kotler-Wunsch points out the obvious. APR renders anyone who defines or who is defined as a Zionist or just believes Israel has a right to exist as a racist. Yeah, that's obviously, again, a stupid thing. What we're witnessing in Canada is the diffusion of a very particular kind of anti-Semitism, Kotler-Wunsch told me. The country's susceptibility to the anti-Zionist iteration of anti-Semitism is partly because Canadians have lost the capacity to identify with strongly held national values, Kotler-Wunsch argued. Canadians aren't especially patriotic, she said. So there's a live and let live idea, but it results in indifference. And that has allowed anti-Semitism to course through Canada's institutional bloodstream largely unchecked. This Kotler-Wunsch's adoptive father, Irwin Kotler, is a renowned international human rights champion and Canada's former justice minister. A tireless advocate for dissidents in Russia, Iran, China, and elsewhere, Kotler served as Canada's special envoy on preserving Holocaust remembrance and combating anti-Semitism until just days after October 7th. And it says right here, is this him? Yep, that is him. Irwin Kotler says, I have never seen in all my life such a thing, such expressions from people of all ages, such expressions of apprehension, of isolation, insecurity, foreboding, expressed in different ways. It says, last December, after he failed to show up at a Toronto event celebrating the imprisoned Hong Kong dissident Jimmy Lai, it was disclosed that Kotler was under 24-hour police protection because of a threat to his life. And the assassination plot was hatched in Tehran, so of course they're behind it. I don't even know what to say at this point. Seeing that was heartbreaking, Kotler-Wunsch told me. The thought that this would happen in Canada, the thought that in this multicultural beacon of dignity for all, that Canada's former justice minister, a human rights warrior who fought for hundreds of people around the world, was under house arrest, you could say, trapped in his own home, is really heartbreaking. It says, heartbreaking is a word that well describes the way Canadian Jews see their predicament these days. I have never seen in all my life such a thing, such expressions from people of all ages, such expressions of apprehension, of isolation, insecurity, foreboding, expressed in different ways, said Kotler, 84, when we spoke last week. I see it when I meet with students. I see it when I meet with elderly people. I hear this is not the Canada I know, or this is not the Canada I came to, or this is not the Canada I have ever experienced, this is something else. And they are afraid to publicly express it. In part, that's because anti-Semitism is no longer just some protest culture eccentricity. It's going mainstream from the bottom to the top. Consider the fact that the Toronto District School Board has voted to incorporate anti-Palestinian racism within its overall anti-discrimination strategy. That's going to be a problem. This APR has been endorsed by the NDP and championed by Liberal MP Jenica Atwin. Its most senior advocate is the Trudeau government's own special representative on combating Islamophobia, Amira El-Gawhabi, and I probably butchered that name too. This last month, El-Gawhabi said Trudeau himself had agreed to come up with a definition of APR and put it into practice. Yeah, that's going to be a mistake because the dude is an idiot. It's already gotten to the point that if you enter public conversations by saying anything contrary to the APR doctrine, you'd better be very careful. saying anything that contradicts Palestinian narratives or questions the right of Palestinians to sovereignty in all of historic Palestine, or something that could be construed as denying the Nakba, and you can end up destroying your political career no matter how solid your progressive bona fides might be. This was exactly the fate of Selina Robinson, the popular Minister of Post-Secondary Education in British Columbia's NDP government. A target was painted on Robinson's back last October when she objected to a college professor who had delivered a speech at a Samidoun Prisoner Solidarity Network rally praising Hamas for its amazing and brilliant attack on October 7th. It was in January that Robinson's fate was sealed. She objected. Yeah, I mean, she was right to do an objection to that. Okay, go look up who Samidoun is, that organization. So, yeah, she was right. So, in a panel discussion hosted by B'nai B'rith Canada, Robinson had lamented that too many students knew little about the Holocaust and almost nothing about how Israel was brought into being by Jews who built a nation-state from scratch. It was a crappy piece of land with nothing on it. There were several 100,000 people, Robinson said. But other than that, it didn't produce an economy. It couldn't grow things. It didn't have anything in it. That is correct. And, yep, this is her. So let's keep going. It says this was true, but it didn't matter. It was inconsistent with Palestinian narratives, so it was anti-Palestinian racism, which meant Robinson herself was a racist. British Columbia Premier David Eby fired her from cabinet, despite her apologies, on the grounds that what she said was irreparably hurtful. And F that guy. Since Robinson offered to subject herself to anti-Islamophobia training, so I will bend the knee and go to indoctrination camp. Time for a struggle session. But Premier Eby declined her offer when her detractors held it up as further evidence of her racism because she'd failed to distinguish Islamophobia from anti-Palestinian racism. Robinson then resigned from the NDP caucus. In Ramallah, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, which the Samidoun network serves as its primary overseas propaganda arm, declared victory. And there you go with the, don't need to go look up Samidoun, there's what they do. As this resounding fall of one of Canada's ministers biased towards Zionism, and the shift in the official Canadian stance on the aggression against the Gaza Strip confirms that the Palestinian cause is present in the conscience of the majority of the Canadian people, and that means a lot to them. The PFLP declared, oh, fuck off, and apologies for the language, but I gotta say that there. Looks like we're almost done. So as Robinson told me she's trying to sort out what it all means, but one thing seems certain. The broad spectrum of the liberal left, such as it is, has to somehow free itself from the trap of identity politics, she said. At some point, even if things burn to the ground, you still have to rise from the ashes. We need to start thinking about what we can salvage, Robinson added. There are times when even someone like me, who has been around for a while and has seen a lot of stuff, gets despondent, said Shimon Koffler-Fogel, the CEO of Canada's preeminent Jewish advocacy organization, the Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs. But I am as much concerned for society writ large as I am parochially for the Jewish community, Fogel told me. Said people really fail to understand the nature and the scope of the challenges we're facing and what we've experienced over the past number of years, he said. It's really about the way the fundamental values of Western society are under assault in a way that they have never been. Many of us are sleepwalking through this challenge. I fear that we're going to wake up in the not-too-distant future and say, what the hell? How did this happen? That's a long one, folks. It is very, 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 very long. So at this point, I'll just pretty much say, like, if you're in Canada and you happen to hear this and you happen to stay through the whole thing, number one, to anybody listening to the whole thing, thank you very, very much. I truly appreciate it. I need to get the watch time up on my videos because I am not monetized, and that's the only thing keeping me from being monetized, so hopefully this will help. But I think it was an excellent article, and it points out a lot of stuff that I just didn't know, and I'd say it's not safe for Jews in Canada anymore. Yeah, it's just awful. Yeah, I don't really have anything more to add. This is, again, very, very long, very, very thorough. So let me know what you think about this in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.